Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry and I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, this video came from the video suggestions over on the Discord server. It's called Europe's North Korea, and the thumbnail has Albania on it. Now, this is from a channel I have not heard of. It's called Imperial, but it's got over 2 million views in 5 months. So maybe I'm missing something here. All right, come on with me. Let's learn about Albania, why they're the North Korea, and I'll let you know what I think along the way. All right, so Albania gets ripped a lot anyways. It's kind of being an outlier kind of nation, especially for the Balkans. So we'll see what's going on. You see if this is going to be like more of a, I don't know, Christian Europe, Balkans hating stereotype projection kind of thing, or are we going to get some good history here? We'll see.
At the mouth of This is Albania, a tiny mountainous nation nestled at the mouth of the Adriatic. Today, the unassuming territory is the third poorest in Europe and consistently ranks among the most corrupt nations in the
Actually,
region.
did not know it was that low economically.
Yet even this less than ideal position is paradise compared to what it was a little over 30 years ago.
Yeah.
In the mid-90s...
I mean, to be honest, you could probably say that about any Balkan state from 1990 after the brutal Yugoslav wars and
80s, the Albanian state was a communist hermit kingdom that ranked as the third poorest country in the world.
So a meme I saw about Albania, by the way, was that Albania are Muslim Italians. What do you think about that?
Not just
I know it's a meme, but
it was ruled by a paranoid dictator who carried out Stalin-esque purges.
you have a lot of history back to the old Roman Empire, but yeah.
And kept the populace docile through a network of prisons and brutal secret police.
Par for the course on those
almost completely diplomatically
communist states there back
isolated. The country resisted the modernizing influences of its neighbors and even the rest of the communist
really did operate like an island
and remained a relic of a totalitarian past.
Because you had like, okay, you had, but I mean, okay, so like being communist, that's not gonna be a big deal. You had Yugoslavia, you had Tito, you had all that stuff. But like Albania has always been kind of an island unto itself. And, you know, even going back like Ottoman Empire controlling the Balkans, even though, you know, you have like an Islamic State, or they've always kind of been their own deal.
It was Europe's North Korea, an equivalent in all respects except for its geography and longevity, and here is its story. One of the dictator Enver Hoxha and his paranoia of a mysterious isolated neighborhood in the nation's capital and life within the state stuck in time.
I don't know a lot about him, I'll be honest, so help me out. Let you know what I'm thinking along the way.
Albania was a nation forged in the crucible of conflict. It was invaded by Italy in 1939 and only managed to free itself from fascism 5 years later after a German occupation retreated from the...
One of the multiple places that Italy had invaded before World War II began that the United Nations basically shut up about. You know, it started with Ethiopia and then you got Albania, but people usually think of like, you know, Germany's invasion of Poland as really like a catalyst for imperialism leading to World War II. But of course, even before that with the Germans, you have Czechoslovakia, you have Austria, you have Rhineland and stuff. But yeah, long forgotten part of this part of World War II history.
The Southern Balkans in late 1944. What remained in their place was the remnants of collaborationists, monarchists, nationalists, and communist partisans.
And this is par for the course for places that were occupied in World War II. If you're invaded and run by a fascist state, you might go with an anti-fascist philosophy, or you know, pursue some kind of anti-fascist ideology, say like communism. You're going to see that in other places in the Balkans and Europe too. It seemed like an alternative to what they had experienced. People forget the context of that, of the rise of some of these communist states as a result of their experiences in World War II.
In this power vacuum, a relatively unknown variable by the name of Enver Hoxha emerged at the top of the country's foremost political entity, the Party of Labour of Albania, or the PLA. Even the country's most well-read chroniclers are puzzled by exactly how this unexceptional man achieved such a feat. He was not particularly intelligent, nor was he influential in the party.
Did you say he was not intelligent?
He was not particularly intelligent, nor was he influential in the party.
What was he, like a brute, like Stalin was in the rise of the Bolsheviks? You know, you had like the brain like Lenin or Trotsky or something. You just had the brute like Stalin.
His presence at the party's founding was speculated to be a bid to meet religious quotas.
Is that his actual brain?
All other members were Christian, and they needed a Muslim member to be representative of the population.
Okay.
By all accounts,
it was like DEI
he
hire,
was just in the
saying?
right place at the right time, had a handful of influential allies, and crucially, had the stomach to snatch the opportunity with a clinical viciousness.
To be honest, any like dictator or anything pretty much needs all three of those things. That's the
His
recipe.
unscrupulous strategies would see him become a paranoid despot, rivaled only by his contemporary in North Korea, Kim Il-sung. Hoxha's cutthroat approach to ensuring his political supremacy would be demonstrated as soon as the German occupiers began pulling out of the Balkans in late 1944.
Kim Il-sung, though, also was, he would also acted, he tried to be like an intellectual, though, tons of writings and things like that. So I wonder, it doesn't sound like they're very similar that way.
As the Wehrmacht retreated northwards, the communist-controlled National Liberation Army, or the NLA, directed by the 34-year-old Hoxha, shadowed them and conducted a political cleansing campaign in the abandoned areas where all perceived political opponents were liquidated.
Would that be fascist collaborators with the Italians? I wonder what the target demographic was, because it just said, enemies, so who specifically?
In these early days of centralizing power, Hoxha would display a brutality that would become characteristic of his rule. In the words of one New Republic journalist, quote, Hoxha ordered purges like other people order out for pizza. On numerous occasions,
he is Stalin.
He would order the arrest, torture, and killing of former allies
Stalin.
and enemies alike, as well as people he resented on a personal level. Out of jealousy, he once had a prominent communist by the name of Lazar Fundo tortured to death because he was a successful envoy to Comintern, the supranational organization that sought to spark world revolution.
Interesting. So he is not one that was part of the Comintern. So in the original years of really this explosion of Communist Party success in the early 20th century, the movement was supposed to be, and this goes back to Marx and Lenin carried it on, about international revolution of the working class. And then things they're going to change over time. And then you get like communism in one country and it becomes nationalistic when, remember, by the definitions of communists is it's moneyless, classless, and stateless. And you have these branch of these guys, say like Stalin or something, that weren't pursuing the international thing and we're using we're tying up nationalism basically into this. And it sounds like that's what this guy was. Did not want to be a part of the international community that way. But not just that, but killing those who did have that connection and wanted to be a part of that global movement.
And because he had insulted him in the past. Hoxha's personal dislike of Fundo was amplified by rumors from Yugoslavia.
Definitely not a Marxist or Leninist.
Subversive Trotskyist, a alleged revisionist that wanted to pervert Marxist ideology. This was a common charge used in the communist nations of the time, and the accusation typically held very little water. It was usually employed to justify the elimination of a nuisance to the established leadership. For Hoxha, it was just a convenient...
Wouldn't that have been after? Trotskyism died when Stalin took over. Essentially, he gets kicked out of the country, he gets assassinated in Mexico.
...excuse to persecute someone he already despised and viewed as a potential rival. Hoxha must have realized, though, that if he could determine Fundo's associates, he too could brand them Trotskyists. So he asked that when captured...
Guilt by
torturers
association.
Extracted the names of Fundo's allies in the PLA. Hoxha was always on the lookout for information that could provide him leverage over others. This political vigilance, however, would end up turning Hoxha into the most paranoid man in Europe.
This stuff is often self-defeating, these type of things. You create so many enemies, paranoia again becomes rampant that you end up creating new ones and you end up imploding on yourself. It's self-defeating in a lot of ways.
Over the course of his 41-year rule, from 1944 to 1985, the dictator would kill founding party members so that they could not use their seniority to undermine his legitimacy, and he would have childhood friends executed or sent to prison.
This guy sounds more like a Stalin than a Kim Il-sung Anyone else getting this kind of vibe?
For straying from the party line. Like Stalin, the man after which he modeled many of his own policies and his own cult of the personality, Hoxha would further alter the past by
did he have the cult of personality like Stalin? Stalin had charisma. He had a devout following of people that would, run through a brick wall for him. You know what I mean? Did he have that kind of charisma?
Records. To erase evidence of anyone's prior involvement with the PLA, he would have the faces of disgraced politicians scratched from photos.
That's what Stalin used
as if
to
they
do
had
too.
never existed, eliminating
Photoshop
even the smallest traces of opposition. When his right-hand man and presumed heir, Mehmet Shehu, died due to an apparent suicide in 1981, there was speculation that Hoxha had ordered his death. Not least because immediately after his demise, the dictator announced absurdly that Shehu had been a traitor all along and had been, in fact, an agent not just for the Soviets, but also for the Americans. If Shehu's death was indeed a suicide, it was one only in name. Days before his death, Hoxha had forced him to engage in self-criticism for allowing his son to be engaged to a woman who had anti-communist relatives in America. When Hoxha
they wanted him to, so that helps change the narrative of this guy's life. It's like, it's not enough to like just assassinate this guy, which, you could, but you want them to out themselves before that. So their image can be tainted or something like that. Force something out of them before they die, game over themselves, whatever.
The Politburo, Albania's governing body, to discuss the scandal, Shehu must have suspected that his time was drawing near and decided to take matters into his own hands.
By the way, the graphics, the production values of this, fantastic right now. This has been very well done so far.
Hoxha had not pulled the trigger, but he had given Shehu the gun, so to say. Shehu was as close to stubbornly loyal as you could get. Domestic observers and party officials testified that he had never engaged in policy disagreement with Hoxha and was utterly subservient. American intelligence sources believed the same. They doubted that Shehu would ever challenge Hoxha's authority. Perhaps the reason for Hoxha's actions, aside from the laughable assertion of the second most powerful man in the country being a double agent for two rival powers, was that Shehu was toying with the idea of tempering Albania's isolationism. It was reported that he had recently conducted
That's where I'm getting the North Korea vibes, because that's essentially what Kim Il-sung did, Juche philosophy, which was basically screw the rest of the world. We'll do our own thing, okay? We don't need to be a part of the international, workers' revolution or anything like that. And usually that stuff's based on context. For Korea, their historical context has been one of being a victim of imperialism for centuries. Okay, from Japan to China, Mongols invaded, Russia getting in their business, and it makes sense for that. Albania, it makes a little bit less sense. They don't have nearly as much of the more recent effects of imperialism to them, although they did obviously in leading to World War II. But yeah, that's where I am seeing the connections.
With the capitalist nations of Europe and Yugoslavia, Albania's longtime rival.
Yeah.
Hoxha, notoriously paranoid of foreign influences and favouring isolationism, may have felt undermined.
Unless you're Kosovo.
Alternatively, some intelligence reports argue that by 1981, Hoxha was in favour of a degree of increased interaction with the Western world. If this is the case, then his targeting of Shehu may have been entirely personal, something we will get into in the last chapter of this video. Hoxha's heavy isolationist slant during his time in power is perhaps one of the most obvious parallels to North Korea. Like the Korean hermit
is their isolationism, you think, in part to, it's like their neighbor, so they got a communist neighbor in Yugoslavia. It's just the deep hatred that they had for them, because there's a lot of is that where it comes from? We're talking about the isolation. I was just telling you about the context of North Korea. Is it more just like being surrounded by enemies for so long that, okay, like being a communist nation isn't enough to provide like a healthy relationship? That's not enough. Like the deep ethno-religious differences surpass this idea of common philosophies.
Albania's most obvious parallels to North Korea. Like the Korean hermit kingdom, Albania shunned nations that should have been its allies.
Yeah.
Both Hoxha and Kim Il-sung would break with the Soviet Union and China, effectively alienating the only countries that would have any reason to support them.
Korea had both.
Albania
issues
already
with both
kept
of them
every
in
nation
history.
on Earth at arm's length, a policy manifested in the general hostility to any foreign, but particularly Western products, ideas, art, or media.
See, and that's hard if you can't economically be self-sufficient. Because obviously, as a communist state, they're not going to get any help from Western capitalist states. And then if you're isolating yourselves from other communist states, then who do you deal with? Albania is a small country. Can they actually be self-sufficient in a modern world like that? That's where it seems like that would not be the case. And it makes sense if they had a lot of these economic or whatever issues during these decades.
The aversion was so extreme that in 1979, one artist by the name of Mark Vello was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in one of the country's most brutal prisons just for producing art that showed traces of, quote, foreign influences.
Oh my God.
This alienation of all allies and suspicion of all things foreign meant that Hoxha could present the rest of the world however
These graphics are cool.
If he wanted to construct a narrative in which the rest of the world was working to see Albania fail,
shout out to the graphic designers.
And that is what he did. When the American reporter Harrison Salisbury visited the country in 1957, he noted that Albanians believed America was orchestrating a plot to place the exiled King Zog back on the throne.
Zog, I do know him. I've heard of him. You know what this channel, the vibes they're giving me is Lemino. You guys watch Lemino? The design and stuff seems very like inspired by that. Maybe, I don't know.
Zog had been deposed by the Italian invasion of 1939, and his feared reinstatement would see Albania transformed back into a medieval serfdom. This sort of sentiment was a product of Albania's propaganda machine.
Yeah.
Now,
that makes sense.
the United Kingdom and the United
that.
States had tried to overthrow Hoxha's government in the years after World War II, under the highly classified codename Operation Valuable Fiend. But they had failed
I've never heard of that
miserably,
name.
and since 1954 had given up on the prospect of subverting communism in Albania. But this operation had two lasting effects. It formed the basis of Hoxha's foreign paranoia and gave him justification to be extremely prejudiced when trying to root out subversion. It would also lead him to grow distrustful of the Soviet Union, who after 1954 opened up to the West under Khrushchev, and China, who did the same
that was in the
after
60s.
1972.
Kennedy was not in the 50s, or Khrushchev. That was still going to be Stalin time and Eisenhower. But yeah, I wonder if he also would get paranoid when he saw like Joseph Tito in Yugoslavia have all those attempts that he survived of assassination by Stalin.
As more socialist nations entered rapprochement with the capitalist world, Hoxha began to believe that Albania was the only true bastion of Marxism left, with all others
they don't sound Marxist
from a path.
Like at all.
In the words of one Yugoslav contemporary, in Hoxha's mind, quote, "The whole world conspires against little Albania. Capitalists and imperialists, neighboring revisionist Yugoslavia, and the far-off clique in Peking. The Moscow revisionists, Italian and Spanish Euro-communists, and many others." This led to a siege mentality in Albania, which Hoxha hoped would prompt his subjects to adhere to the principles of the state as if their life depended on it.
What do they mean by
Because
siege?
otherwise, it was implied, Albania would be vanquished. In his own words, for Albania to be self-reliant and protect itself from its enemies, everyone should, quote, work and live as if in a state of siege.
So no one's coming after them. Okay, they already said, okay, the CIA, all right, I could say that because the CIA was up in everyone's business. But if you were already communist by like 54, like Truman Doctrine for the most part was like, all right, whatever, we're going to leave you alone. It was after that where it was like if communism was to spread, but it looks like Albania has no intention of doing their own type of imperialism or to their neighbors. It's like they weren't a threat. They don't feel like they have to be like North Korea would have been.
This would manifest very literally, with Hoxha embarking on an insane campaign to construct 170,000 bunkers around the country between 1975 and 85.
Except nobody's
These concrete edifices permanently projected
maybe Yugoslavia
an air of unease around the country and helped etch into the mind of every Albanian that the world was against them.
Who's going to come? Yeah,
and that the PLA was in an
Yugoslavia gonna
existential struggle. The construction of these bunkers also meant that the money that may have gone to improving the living conditions of the average Albanian was instead sucked up by a paranoia project. Between 9.6 to 11.4% of the nation's national budget went to national defense, and much of it was spent on bunkers. This obsession with defense at the expense of the people was not a new trend. In 1971, then Prime Minister Mehmet Shehu recalled that, quote,
So he did
in
take over.
1961, we couldn't care less about bread, but we were desperate for weapons because the revisionist Russians could attack
The
us.
Russians might go over and attack them. They might like bypass the whole Iron Curtain and then skip Yugoslavia. They're like, all right, we already tried with Tito. We're not going to mess with him anymore. Let's just hop over to little Albania, which would offer little to nothing for the Soviet Union, I think.
In the face of a
Although allies
perceived
are
foreign
allies.
threat, the welfare of the citizenry came second to the security of the state.
Were those the
Albania
bunkers?
was already an extremely poor country, with many of its inhabitants on the verge of starvation, and the burgeoning military expenses only served to increase their misery. Albania's poverty was most evident in the capital, Tirana, which should have been the country's crown jewel. When
be
the
the showpiece.
Bavarian premier Franz Josef Strauss visited the country in August of 1984, his son noted that at night there were no cars to be found using the city's streets, and that when
No
they had
nightlife,
visited
nothing like
Albania's Museum of Technology, they encountered a tractor from the 1920s and manually operated telephone switchboards.
And
Most of the
manual
population
switchboards.
lived in
In
cramped
84? Oh gosh. Wah, wah.
flats, with 4 to 10 people crammed in little more than 50 square meters, just 1/5 the size of a tennis court.
Infrastructure sucks.
But this was not the case everywhere in Tirana. Just south of the city centre existed a forbidden zone, the mysterious and isolated block.
Good, very Lemino.
This
Anyone
neighbourhood was
getting those
reserved for
vibes?
the upper strata of Albania's Politburo and was populated with lavish apartments, restaurants, clubs, private clinics, and special grocery stores. It was, as one individual described it, an oasis, presumably implying its surroundings to be comparably poorly developed. When the block was set up in late 1944 to serve as Albania's forbidden city, residents were expelled
Pulled
by
a
the
Beijing
Albanian secret police
Qing dynasty on 'em.
Signorini, to make room for the incoming party apparatchiks. The area started being patrolled by plainclothes police officers, and checkpoints populated by armed guards were erected around the perimeter of the neighborhood to keep out the riffraff. Even Enver Hoxha's street was sectioned off to party members. One place in the block is of particular interest.
Why?
This building adjacent to the Central Committee building of the Communist Party, whose sole purpose was to function as a sort of club for party elites.
Oh, jeez.
Within its walls, you
There's
could
always
find
one
a
of these.
cinema showing banned foreign movies, lounges, billiard rooms, and party functionaries schmoozing with each other.
All the
while drinking
Western
expensive
crap.
liquor.
Like the whole Kim dynasty of Korea, of North Korea does, right? Like Western wine and loving movies, Western movies and all this banned stuff. Oh my gosh, they always have this.
This
crap.
building, nicknamed the Party House,
The hypocrites,
was the
right?
encapsulation of the divide between haves and have-nots, and the hypocrisy of party elites breaking the rules
exact
that they
opposite of
themselves
Marxism.
had set out for the country. The building served a unique purpose for the paranoid Enver Hoxha. It acted as a panopticon, allowing him to monitor his subordinates closely. The son of
Like a little
Albania's trade
Versailles.
minister, Spartak Njela, wrote that Hoxha demanded that all high-ranking party members attend the club every single day, so as to continually gauge their loyalty to him.
Your friends close.
He
but your
treated
enemies
this rule
closer.
with the utmost seriousness, to the degree that when he set out charges against a minister in his government, who had requested, among other things, a democratization of the party, he cited the minister's absence at the club over the past 2 months as additional justification for his arrest.
Too cool for
The
a
party
club.
house's secret function reflected the general state of paranoia in the block, which seeped down from Hoxha himself and spilled out into the rest of the party apparatus. To ensure political longevity, residents of the block would intermarry, leading to a quasi-incestuous and highly isolated web of
Oh,
relationships.
what?
Although it was insisted that, quote, close blood affinity was generally avoided, it was a shallow gene pool regardless. In this close-knit but highly suspicious community, an atmosphere of unease was pervasive. Everyone was ready to out each other if they detected a hint of treachery, even if it was a father, a husband, or a son. Given the inbreeding situation, possibly all at the same time. Elsewhere in the block was Hoxha's...
So that stuff was supposed to end when feudalism and all this stuff was over, where you're not going to mix with the commoners, so you just inbreed with the nobles. It's like, there is nothing communist about these guys.
Specialized clinic,
not
stocked with Western medicines and staffed with foreign-trained doctors. He even employed a renowned French physician by the name of Paul Millier to round out his medical team. Hoxha was diagnosed with diabetes in 1948 and had been undergoing treatment ever since. And it is here in his medical plight that we can see his paranoia was selective. For all his fulmination against and suspicion of foreign influences and products, his medical team was dominated by expatriate expertise, and his medical cabinet was stocked with foreign drugs. Expertise and drugs,
he's like, I know we have no
which did not extend to his own population.
Industry.
Hoxha also drove a tricked-out Mercedes-Benz, a product of West Germany,
a
capitalist power. Private property was illegal, and private vehicles therefore also prohibited. But this did not seem to apply to Enver or many of those in his cabinet. The average person would never see a car, with there being only 1,265 private vehicles in the entire country.
Westernization for me, but not for thee.
Inside his isolated manor in Tirana, Hoxha's study overflowed with translated literary works from the libraries of the enemy. Nietzsche, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Christie, and Machiavelli
all the stuff that he was executing people for?
Their spines peering out into a world in which they did not belong.
I mean, okay, put that aside. That's an awesome library to have all these classics of different writers and philosophies and stuff. But if you're going to execute people and censor all of this same stuff, yeah, okay, now it's getting a little bit more like Kim Jong-il or Kim Il-sung, you know, those guys.
Much like how political dissidents under his rule were put behind bars, literature too was imprisoned. Hoxha's censorship regime verged on that of North Korea's infamously restrictive system, but he made sure his library was free from scrutiny. When Kim Il-sung died in 1994, North Korea entered a prolonged state of mourning, and the average citizen engaged in public displays of hysteria as if the lodestar of the North Korean state had been snuffed out.
A lot of that was definitely forced, you know, with that. But because it's amazing how quickly it would have happened with Korea developing this cult of personality for their first leader. You know, you could get that kind of despair for the guys after, for people that are generation 2 and 3 of communist Korea. But is the same thing going to happen when Hoxha dies?
Similarly, in Albania, Hoxha's death was accompanied by a period of extreme public distress. Hoxha's cult of the personality had constructed him to be what was effectively a god among men, the glue that held the nation together. He really had the charisma of seemingly eternal and infallible
the others to have that. Like, and what I mean by that is a genuine, more like genuine charisma and cult of personality. He was able to develop that to those levels, or again, is it just completely forced?
So upon his passing, for those who had been submerged in this propaganda for decades, it was as if the world as they knew it was crumbling before their very eyes. For dissidents, not entranced by his spell, they too feigned sadness for fear of reprisals.
There's the North Korea.
In parallels to North Korea, Albanians wailed and screamed at the sight of their dictator's coffin, while others looked somberly onwards, displaying their deference to their beloved leader. As is evidenced by what footage remains of the 7 days of mourning ordered following Hoxha's death, the funeral rites and acts of remembrance were highly choreographed. Throughout Hoxha's entire life, he had been careful to present...
What was the state of religion at this time at that? Because it's like, okay, they're using, you know, people with Muslim backgrounds and stuff, but still more of a secular state.
...himself as the sole cause of Albania's good fortune. As the Axis powers retreated from Albania, he had distributed pamphlets around the country that cited him as the architect behind the liberation and all the victories against the fascist occupiers. Hoxha never had an official biographer and personally penned in great self-congratulating detail the many achievements he had heralded in throughout his life. The way in which he would be remembered was incredibly important to him. So much so that it's speculated he offed his most loyal ally and presumed heir, the previously mentioned Mehmet Shehu, because he was afraid that Shehu might outshine him after he died.
Think you're better than me?
Opulent and grandiose funeral was likely his final act of self-deification, a last gasp in ensuring his legacy would last. In the end, it did. It outlasted even the communist state of Albania, which fell to ruin in 1992. It seemed without Hoxha's iron fist, the People's Socialist Republic of Albania lacked the political will to exist. The entrenched elite of the country knew loyalty only to Hoxha, and without his presence keeping them on a short leash, they became unmoored. Albania opened up to the world. Politicians permitted foreign broadcasts to be viewed in the country.
So it sounds like they're going to enter a period of glasnost, maybe some perestroika or something like that from the Soviet Union. It's like the fate of all of these communist countries from that era, the post-World War II era, all basically ended the same way.
The fear that kept people in line gradually vanished. Hoxha could rule from the grave only for so long, and with his death, the collapse of Europe's North Korea was almost inevitable. Hey everyone, this video was brought to you not by a sponsor, but this channel's YouTube members. You contribute a few dollars every month
to help me
YouTube produce the videos
channel members.
On the channel today.
You saw this video first,
and you like my content, then you can do so by clicking the join link underneath this video and contributing however much you feel comfortable.
Do that. Become a member of their channel. All right, final thoughts. All right, I learned a ton from this this video from this new channel. Again, I have not seen content from. So anyways, I learned a lot about Albania. Again, I was telling you at the beginning, Albania being kind of a gray area for me. So learning about, just learn about this whole stage from basically World War II to the 80s and into the 90s that, put a little more sight on it. Definitely got a lot more to learn, but this was very informative that way. So thank you for the suggestion. All right. With that, you all, we'll see you next time. Bye.